want to just give, so today is around UX research. We're joined by Kate, who I'll introduce in a minute. I want to give those who are first timers some understanding of our basic rules of operation. So as a group, this is how we operate together. My first request is to be ambitious, be on time, and be ready to go. There's going to be a lot of opportunities. We're actually developing a project going forward. And I want you to know the people who are going to benefit the most are those who are ambitious. And I have probably about 10 individuals now who participate in virtually everything. And they've gained a lot. So the more you're ambitious you are, the more you're going to gain out of it. Please respect everyone's personal experience. It's different than yours. You may hear something that you don't agree with. It's okay. That's their experience. And yours is just as valid. And if you'd like to ask a question or share something, place it in chat. I'm going to try and monitor the questions for Kate as well as, but she's going to run it. And if you, in today's session, if you want to hold your question, we're going to have a Q&A session where we can dive into some stuff as well. If you participate, I only have one request in that if you agree to help 2 other people, I don't ask for anything. I love doing this. But the details of how you help 2 other people are completely up to you. But the best way to learn is to teach. So if you've learned something really valuable or you want to help someone, don't hesitate to do that here. And from time to time, bring something you've learned to the group. We have a lot of people contributing on Slack who are really providing a lot of resources, classes, trainings, ideas, articles. So if you see something real valuable, put it in Slack. So give you a quick update. We're working on a couple things right now. I am actually asking for help on a personal project. It's just going to be a fun project to give you some experience. If you want to participate, DM me with your interest and let me know if you're interested in research or design. I'm going to try and segment activities. We also have a leadership group. There's about 10 of us. If you're interested in joining it, please DM me. And then December 11th, we're going to have John Yablonsky. He's the senior product designer at General Motors, and he's going to be presenting UX laws. And I want to encourage you, if you've ever gone through the UX laws, it is probably one of my more foundational learnings of understanding there are basic laws to how people interact with things. And they're extremely helpful. And I can honestly say the UX laws have been one of my more helpful things that I've learned. There are no Friday lunches December 25th or January 1st. And to give you a little bit of an update, the leadership group is actually putting together a personal project. And I want to give you, so we're putting together a Mirrorboard, and I wanted to walk this through really quick of how we did this. So our goal was to establish a new project. So we said, let's create a fun one. And what we did is we broke it out into 2 segments of digital products and physical products, or human-centric points. And the idea is we had people list out all kinds of problem statements or pain points on each of these categories. And then we clustered the ideas together. Kate, you've probably done this a lot, where you take ideas and you have a lot of redundancy. So one of the ways you can reduce that redundancy is clustering. And then we are just, as a leadership team, beginning to vote through dot voting. That's a very common process you'll use in UX to come to a conclusion about a direction you want to go as a team. This is the leadership team is involved in this project. We're going to release this to the larger group if you want to participate. Details of that should be coming shortly. We meet as a leadership group every Monday, every 2 weeks. So things are forming, got some good stuff coming down the road. If you want to participate, let me know. A little bit about me, if you haven't ever been in one of our meetings. My name is Jonathan Brink. I'm the UX lead at StreamSets. We are a startup that is now sort of emerging into enterprise level. There's about 120 of us. I began in marketing, but once I found product design and UX, I immediately knew. So I really started my UX journey in 2000. I was one of the very early product designers in Silicon Valley and absolutely loved it. And I really spent a lot of time learning about how do I best organize product development and product design and research. I've led the design of 7 enterprise platforms. I'm a devoted family man. I love my family. I have a very big Italian family, as you can see. We have a lot of fun when we get together. And that's really what I want you guys to understand about UX mentorship. I want us to have a lot of fun. So hopefully we can create a lot of opportunities for you to have fun. We already had our first design challenge and had some phenomenal participation. So I want to encourage you to be part of that in the future. All right, so today is about user research. I've invited Kate Powell, who is the founder of Element Experience Labs, and she is going to be sharing with us today about some basics of UX research. So, Kate, I'm going to stop sharing and I will let you take it away.
Cool. I'm going to try to do 3 things at once right now, and it's going to be great. So I am using Google Slides because I'm a monster, and we're going to see how well this works. Let's see here. Cool. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. All right. So I'm Kate. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you also to Lacey as well. I see she's in the audience. They were able to bring me to you guys today. Super pumped to chat. This is, fair warning, I don't love talking at people, so it's going to be a bit more interactive. It's less, here's a bunch of information, and more of, here is a framework, ask me your questions. So for those of you who are into that, great. For those of you who are not, sorry in advance, but welcome to UX. That's kind of how we roll here. We ask questions and we get awkward with each other. There might also be some Mural action in the very near future, so stay tuned for that. Just my own background. So everyone asks me, how did I get into UX? It was an accident. I'm a nursing school dropout, and because, you know, yeah, anyways, it didn't work out. And then I found UX through a very freak set of events, and I, like Jonathan, fell in love with it, and I've been doing it ever since. So I did some work on the agency side, worked with some super cool brands, many of which you've probably heard of, but can't disclose because NDAs. And I've since been doing a lot of gig work. And then about 1.5 years ago, I founded Element Experience Labs, which is focused on UX research, coaching and consulting, and teaching people who are really excited about UX and that are really curious about how UX works to just ask really good questions, because I have this philosophy that you can get anywhere in UX if you know how to ask the right questions and solve the right problems. So whether you're in research or design, doesn't matter. That's what we're here for. And that's what I hope to do. One of my biggest passions is just talking with people. And so here we are. We're gonna chat a little bit. So please, if you have any questions, just feel free to jump in. I really appreciate this idea of being ambitious. Also, don't feel like you need to be polite. Just kind of dive in. That's how we roll here.
Kate, I'm going to ask you your first question because you brought it up already. Can you unpack, in 1 or 2 minutes, what drew you to UX? Because you kind of talked about it, but you didn't dive in at all. And I think that's where a lot of people in our group are at. They are in that early stage of wanting to get in. They've discovered a passion. And what was your transition like?
For sure. So, and that's a really good question. And it's one that I've been trying to figure out my answer to because it's not clear cut. I think, so just to give you an idea, I ended up getting a marketing degree. It's a very basic, generic business degree from the University of Akron. And we had an agency open house that was hosted by what is now Publicis Sapient. And they have in Cleveland this super cool, very tech and nerdy user experience lab. So they had all of the eye tracking software and some AR and VR technologies. But my favorite part, as like weird as it was the one-way glass where you can just stalk people for hours and they have no idea you're there. And so I was making a joke with the director of research, like I had no idea that you guys could make a career out of just watching people all day. And it was sounded kind of weird, but that's what I ended up doing and making a career out of. And so it was very much, it was less about like, oh, this is UX and I'm excited about UX, because UX is kind of kitschy and it's one of those things where everyone defines it a little bit differently. My passion was people. I loved hanging out with people. I think that's why I was drawn to nursing, because I wanted to help people. And so I was like, what do you mean like I can make a career out of unpacking and understanding why people do the things that they do? And I didn't have to get a PhD like you would have to in order to become like a clinical psychologist. So in my head, it just added up perfectly. So it started off with just basic usability testing. And then over the course of the years, my career evolved just through happenstance. So the agency got acquired 3 different times in the 3 years that I was there. And with each acquisition, the project started to shift from this is usability testing, this is just find out if the website works and if the user can accomplish the task, to what does the customer journey look like, to what's the overall strategy of what kinds of things could we be creating that could help augment this experience or achieve XY business goal. And so it just kind of evolved into that. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Cool. So I'm going to send a link in the chat. I hope it works. We're going to check it out. Well, I think I sent that to not the whole group. So my first question for you all as you're hopping into the Mural board is, first of all of you, and feel free to like either chime in or just like wave your hand because I can see most of you. How many of you have had experience with UX research? Okay, cool. Seen a lot. Awesome. So I want to take, let's say, 3 minutes and hop into the Mirrorboard, and we're going to, I want you to answer the question, what is UX research? So I put some predetermined stickies in there. Feel free to add them. Feel free to move around. Actually, I'll give you 4 minutes, 1 minute for a learning curve for those of you who have not been. Feel free to hop in. I'm going to set a timer.
Hey, Kate, will you share your view of Mirrorboard so we can see it on the recording?
Absolutely. You're going to have to probably remind me of that a few times because I do hop back and forth quite.
No.
Cool. And it can be anything, one word, full sentences, whatever you want it to be.
Whenever you have a global view of Miro, it always looks like a bunch of ants moving stuff around.
It's kind of the best.
It is kind of cool. And when there's 200 people, when I worked at Charles Schwab, we did this on Mural, which is a different version, and we had 200 people on there at the same time. It was kind of crazy, but it works because they can only see their.
Yeah, and fun UX tooltip for anyone who's interested. Mural, which is not to be confused with Miro, it's pretty much the same tool.
Yeah.
But really struggles with volumes of people. So if you ever have a big group,
really, I did not know that.
You want, yeah.
I did not know that.
We do workshop work, and if you have 20 people in there moving stuff around, it really struggles. So, fun fact. About 90 more seconds. And if you don't know, please put in, I don't know, because you don't know what you don't know. And I'd like to know if you don't know, so. All right, wrap up. Any last thoughts? No. Do that all the time. All right, we're going to go ahead and just get started. If you want to finish your thought, or if there's something else that comes up while we talk, please feel free to document this, because this is something that I will clean up after our talk and send out as a PDF as well. So if you ever want to refer back to it, it's there for you. Okay, so no one needs to feel pressure to identify with their answer, but if you would like to speak to it, please do. I'm not about putting people on the spot, but definitely helps to kind of understand context. Okay, so what is UX research? So lots of really good answers already. Foundation of UX project. I like that answer. That's nice. Oh, there we go. Okay. Foundation of human-centered design. We're going to do exactly what Jonathan was talking about. We're going to just group these together in a little affinity mapping exercise. Asking questions. Okay. We'll unpack that in a little bit. Let's see. Guidance for iterations. Does someone want, whoever, if you want to speak, you don't have to, no pressure, but anyone want to clarify what they meant by this?
Yeah, that's mine.
Awesome. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, because eventually the purpose of the UX research is how to translate the findings into actionable steps. So that's basically like eventually goals of the research is provide a guidance for the designers to do the next iterations. It's not the original purpose of the research, but that's the next step, like from my perspective.
It is an ancillary because it provides guidance of what needs to be addressed. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good answer. It's not going to fit on our sticky note, but that is all right. Doesn't have to. Study that reveals potential problems. Interesting. We'll unpack that one too, because I like that. Study that can learn directly from real users. Yes, yes. Let's see. Oh my goodness. It's fine. We can leave it there. My internet is just like, I'm good. It's Friday night. Providing proof to the design decisions. Ooh, we're gonna talk about that, but we're gonna move that one over here just for a second. I'm gonna build some anticipation, don't worry. All right, learning about what works and doesn't work for your users and their needs. Yes. You can tell I've been in Mural all day. Learning how to help people access products. Does someone want to clarify what they mean by that, by access products?
Hi, yeah, that was me. I think I was kind of, one, just trying to fit it on the post-it note, sorry, but yeah, I guess trying to make sure that I guess the research is helping to make whatever the product is accessible to everyone. So I kind of felt like that was a key part of UX research.
Mm. Yeah, so because when we think in UX, when we talk about accessibility, that's a little bit different. So when you say people help access products, typically when we use the term access, and Jonathan, feel free to jump in here, that usually means that we're trying to understand just the accessibility, and it's a very technical thing. Can everyone use it? And I'm not saying like general usability, but those who may not function as the greater population. Like, can we account for edge cases, etc.?
Yeah, accessibility is almost becoming its own little part. People who do accessibility studies really tend to be consultants that focus I have a lot of friends who are focused only on that as their entire research framework, because so many companies don't even know how to start. So it's a huge problem.
Absolutely. I see. Okay, so there's some sticky notes in here that have text boxes in them. So we're gonna just leave those alone. Let's see, balancing MVP and business goals. Hello, someone's been around the block for a second. Yes, let's see. We're just gonna leave that in the middle. Investigative process to find out more context on a subject. Interesting. Okay, so we're gonna kind of move this over here. Asking questions, experiment. So I'm seeing a lot about learning more about people, learning more about experiences, validating some design, revealing potential problems, checking assumptions about the user. Someone tell me more about this.
Yeah, that was mine. I think like in my own process when I've done projects, we've kind of started out with kind of a proto persona that we're trying to design for. And obviously, like you can't just say, okay, this is exactly who it's going to be. So you have to go out there and kind of interview people to make sure that that's accurate. So that's kind of what I had in mind.
Cool. Is there anything on this board that people see, think, or feel like they might object with or disagree with? Safe space.
I have something, if it's okay to jump in. Shouldn't user research be more than just validation?
Tell me more.
I see user research as a larger spectrum. It's a way to discover, a way to uncover, a way to
Watching a Zoom in a user UX group that I'm in.
Oh, I think you may not be on mute.
I muted him.
Okay.
I thought that was his. That wasn't mine. So whoever wrote it, I just wanted to make that note that validation is like an end stage thing, and user research is much larger than that, and there's so many other areas to it. So that's the one thing I debate.
Yeah. So I agree with everything you just said, except for that it's end stage, because you can validate experiences as they exist right now. And you can validate them at the end. You can essentially, depending on what you're looking at and the purpose, right? That validation piece can come in at any point, but I do agree that it is much bigger than just validation. So thank you for that, Lacey. I appreciate it. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? And then we'll move on. Cool. All right. So this one's going to be a little bit trickier, and I'm kind of interested to see what you guys have to say, but we're going to do that one more time. You have keynotes over here on the side, so feel free. You can pick any color you want. We can get real festive with it. 'Tis the season. We're going to give you 3 minutes. What is research not? Go ahead and get started.
And I will say this to the group, if you see an affinity, just kind of cluster it next to it so you can help Kate a little bit.
Appreciate that. Also, I'm assuming this ends at 5 correctly. Am I correct?
Yeah.
I just want to like time things
No,
appropriately.
we've got plenty of time. I'll keep track of time and kind of give it to you.
Awesome.
Yeah, we finished in 2 minutes. No, I'm kidding.
It's like, all right, wrap it up. Let's go. We'll just have to
learn something.
we'll just have part 2.
Yeah, exactly.
I love a good cliffhanger. All right, one more minute. All right. I'm already totally digging some of these answers. Okay, so what is UX research not? All right, so first one, confirming your pre-existing bias. Yes, however, not easy to do, let me tell you, because the nature of bias, especially subconscious bias, it's really challenging to get around, which is why UX research should never be done in a silo. If you take anything away from this talk, please take that away. Because the way that you frame your questions until you get really, really good at it, and even when you do get really, really good at it, that comes from years of practice, you still need to have 1 or 2 other people in your question framing, your test designing, in that process to help alleviate that. It is so big, and we don't even realize the impact we have on the way that we ask questions, but we all have a very distinct signature. And so the more people you can bring into the process, even if it's just a quick pass, the more valuable your work is going to be and your insights are going to be, and the less bias is going to exist within your insights. And that goes not just from crafting your study, but also analyzing your work. Oh, so good. It's not there to validate your own assumptions. So I kind of disagree with this one. I agree and disagree. And this is all just my own opinion. So like with anything, always get multiple opinions. As
But
you
Kate, you have experience here, so why don't you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Don't you worry. I'm going there. We're going to dive right in. So as UX and UI and CX and any other letter variation that will pop up in the next 3 to 5 years, experts, you will start to have an understanding of best practices. You will have an understanding of user behaviors. If you work in any one field for any extended period of time, you're going to start to get very comfortable with a user base. So you're allowed to start somewhere. So I would almost say it's our job to come up with hypotheses. Assumptions are just like a blind hypotheses, But then as you start to gain some experience, they become educated guesses. And that's actually a really good place to start. So you don't want your assumptions to drive how you ask the questions, but you're allowed to use your assumptions to inform the kinds of questions that you ask. Does that make sense? Or did I lose you all?
Nope.
I had a quick question.
Sure.
So first of all, like that made a lot of sense. I was wondering if during if you have experience asking like particular questions and you know from other projects, for example, typically how users will respond to a particular design, are you allowed to almost bypass?
That is such a good question, and I'm really glad
Or you understand?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not a matter of bypassing, and
How did that work?
but I think there's a lot of value in leveraging best practices, and that's what those become, right? So when you're working in a very distinct community, especially over a period of time, but a short period of time, because people evolve very quickly, especially in today's day and age, use that, I wouldn't say as a reason to not do UX research, but to start pushing the boundaries of what you're asking about. What kind of learnings are you getting? So it may not be, does this navigation system work? You might have the answer to that. Great. Like, you don't have to test that every single time. So it's like, okay, well, that seems to resonate. What else, like what deeper dimension can we get into when we start asking our questions? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Awesome, for sure. All right, I'm gonna give this about 3 more minutes, and we're gonna dive into the rest for the last like 6 minutes. Okay, trying to persuade users of your way of thinking. Oh yeah, that goes into your bias situation. Establishing design. Yeah, as far as establishing, I would maybe it can definitely help you evolve your design. You're going to initiate it. It's not your customer's job to tell you how to be a designer. And I cannot stress that enough, where a lot of times one of the pitfalls that we have, or designers will get into, especially when you get into, like, for example, they call them studios, where typically in an agile framework, where you have a very close-knit team working on one project over a long period of time, but quickly. They're usually bigger projects. You'll have a designer and a researcher, and you're like iterative testing back and forth, like on a weekly sprint or bi-weekly sprint basis. And what I've seen in the past is our designers would just wait for research to make their designs. And we're like, no, like our customers, it's not their job to do your job. You're the designer. It's your job to understand best practices, to use those educated guesses to make those hypotheses. That's your job, not your customer's job. But they will help you, let you know that you're on the right path. That's where that's supposed to go. So as far as establishing, I agree with you. That is your job. It is your job to evolve and establish. It's the research job to make sure that that design is serving the specific purpose that it was designed to do. It's not the same as marketing research. Bless you. You're my best friend, because let me tell you, not all research is created equal, but it's something that you will find a lot of people will ask me for purchasing data. I'm like, I can't help you with that, man. Like, that's not who I am as a person. That's not my job. I think it's really important to incorporate that data into the customer research that you do, or the user research that you do, but understanding what those differences are is important. But what's more important is for you to know the difference, so you can help educate your teams on what those differences are. And that's going to be the bane of your UX existence. And that's why it's so important for you guys to have that foundation, understand those UX laws, understand your design principles, and also understand how these other UX practices work so that you can educate as you move forward, because there are a lot of people who are excited about UX, but they don't really know a lot about UX, and they will just ask you until you're dead for all kinds of things, and you're allowed to say no, but with that no, just kind of help them understand the difference.
Yeah, my favorite part is when marketing says, hey, can you help us with the sales presentation? You're in design, right?
Yeah, bless them.
We've got a trade show booth we need you to. That's marketing design. That's not me. Sorry. Left that out a long time ago.
Especially in like smaller companies, like startups, they just assume that we all do the same job, and we don't. So that's why it's really important to know what your job actually is. Not a way to argue with other teams. I will tell you, so many people will disagree with you, but you are correct. It's not meant to pit one design or idea against the other. It's more, at the end of the day, you're trying to create the most optimal experience that marries your customers' involvement and joy and functionality with the business goals. At the end of the day, that's why we're here and what we do. That's what UX is. And so there is no this person's right or wrong. It's how can we create the best experience, period. And so once you'll get into the habit as you get some more experience, especially on teams, especially if you're on teams that are more on an agency side working with an in-house client, and or vice versa. You'll start to see, because sometimes when you have multiple interested parties involved, they have a tendency to kind of go at it a little bit, and sometimes your researchers will get pulled in because we're the voice of the customer. And that's one thing that I do not see on here that I would absolutely add. And this is a big one, and it's a big misconception. UX research is not a single portal to the user, period. A lot of times teams will be like, well, your UX researcher is your sole source of truth. And as much as I'd love to be that for anyone or anything, it's not true. And that's why it's so important for those of you who are not going to be UX researchers to also know how UX research works. Is going back to that bias situation, you have to have a diversified understanding of who the customer is. And everyone needs to be on the same page. You can't just have one person on the same page with your customer. That's just a recipe for disaster. So that's something to think about as you're moving forward. And if you know that there's a UX researcher on your team, get involved, offer to take notes, get as much exposure to that study as you can, because then you'll be able to banter back and forth with them and have these like meaningful conversations that will result in better design, so to speak. Cool. All right, I have 5 minutes, I think. I'm assuming we were going to save 15 minutes for Q&A. So I'm going to quickly go through the presentation that I have. That being said, before we do that, are there any questions about the difference between what UX research is and what UX research is not, or anything we talked about? Cool. Awesome. Well, you guys did a great job. So I have faith in all of you. So what are the secrets to great UX research? And so anytime someone asks me to talk about UX research best practices, a lot of times these aren't the things that come up. If you Google UX research best practices, you're going to get best practices around specific methods or specific usability testing, but there's very little out there that actually speaks to the process as a whole. Because UX research is not a usability test. A usability test is part of UX research, but in order for it to be UX research, it needs to have all of these things. It has to have a problem, so a well-defined business case, a purpose, and these are specific and measurable goals, along with objectives for what the research is supposed to accomplish, a process, so you have your methods, and I could talk for days about how to pick the right method or how to execute the method correctly, but honestly, that's all trash if you don't have a problem and a purpose and a process to get you started. If you have all of those things, the method just kind of, everything else just falls into place. But what's frustrating from a UX research standpoint is these are very rarely talked about. So what is the problem? What is the purpose? Another problem that happens, and I see this more so with designers, because UX researchers tend to be pulled in as strategists as well. So they work a little bit more closely with the business analysts, with the product owners. And so we're having more of these strategic decisions, like these strategic conversations where the problems are being discussed, where the purpose is being defined. I cannot tell you how frustrating it is as a UX researcher where they're like, well, we talked about the problem in this business case with the stakeholders. They're aware. It's above your pay grade. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in that position. I'm like, well, I don't know what you want me to do, because if I don't know where we're going with this, there's no reason for us to be doing this, period. And those are really fun conversations to have with people who like make 4 times as much as money as you do. And you're like, all right, well, here we go. But that ties back into the fact that as UX practitioners, we're continuous educators. Why does it matter that we're part of those conversations? Why do we need to understand the problem and the purpose in order to execute good research? That's why these conversations are so important. Anyways, tangent over. So we have the process of deciding what kind of tools you're going to use, what methods you're going to use, what are your procedures to systemize and scale. So the biggest problem with UX research, right, is I don't have time, money, or resources to do it. That's number one excuse or reason that I hear why they don't do it. And it's something that's so easily solved once you can create a scalable process around it. And it can just be a Word document of, this is how we're going to approach this. This is how long it's going to take. Here's our stakeholders. So if we have any questions or red tape that needs to be cut through, we can access them. And then the plan. So this is also to the process. This is the more on the ground, how we're going to execute it step by step. And what's great about this is when it's written down, you can distribute it to your team. And so sometimes people will be like, yeah, I've got a free hour on this day. I'll come in and take notes or observe, or I'll run this jam session with you to just act as a sounding board. But it's a great way to get your team involved, even if your team's not a UX researcher or even a UX person. Heck, you know who's really good at taking notes? The secretary. Ask them, hey, would you be interested in just, jotting down a few key takeaways? Amazing. So like, don't tell me you don't have time or resources, because they're everywhere. And the best way to leverage them is by having a plan, being very specific about what it is you need. And the next thing you know, people are just small bite-sized tasks. And next thing you know, you have a UX research team. Boom. Easy. Any questions on these 4 secrets to great UX research?
I just had a quick question, if that's okay. In terms of the stage when you're kind of collaborating with
Lauren, let me so for everyone, as you ask questions, please introduce yourself.
Mm-hmm. Sure, sorry, yeah. So hi, my name's Lauren, and I'm a junior UX researcher. And yeah, so my question was kind of regarding the, I guess, information gathering stage and planning stage, when you're working with the rest of your team to kind of really define the goals of what you're trying to achieve, how do you kind of make sure that you're asking all the right questions? I mean, is there anything in terms of tips or advice on making sure that you're kind of accurately understanding what you need, or anything that you feel is often overlooked in that sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the best frameworks, and it's an oldie, but it's a goodie. It's the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And asking those questions in that order will help you get to that understanding. And if they're like, well, we don't really know who we need to talk to, or we don't know like what it is they're trying to accomplish, then you're starting to identify what those gaps are. Okay, why don't we know what they're trying to accomplish? Is it because we don't know enough about our users, or we just don't have the data? Or is that something we have to go find out? And it goes for all of those questions. So it's a very simple framework, but it's an easy one to start poking holes in the plan. And if no one can answer a deeper, so answer those questions and then ask why after each one. And if you can't get answers, specific answers for each of those, so the who, what, when, where, why, and how, and then ask why again down the line. If you can't get answers for all of those, then you have an information gap, period. And then you can go find out whether it's, you know, that information, is it a known unknown? Is it an unknown unknown? It's a really, if you guys get bored, go check out the known unknown 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 matrix. It's kind of a mess, and it took me a while and like a drink to figure out what it was actually trying to say. But it's a really good tool for identifying information gaps. But you can apply that and say, do we even need to know this in order to move forward? And sometimes you don't. It just depends on the nature of the work that you're doing. And you can say, maybe we'll backlog that question. It's not entirely pertinent to what we're doing right now. And that comes with time and experience.
And Lauren, also, one of the key things that I use it every day, is a big part of knowing what is that point is asking, is this what I hear you saying? Because part of the translation issues from research to key stakeholders is making sure that we understand their intents. So I always ask, what I hear you saying is this, and get clarity to say, yes, that's what I'm saying. And then you really know. And then use, and the development process of that is the who, what, where, and why, how, which we talked about.
Thank you. Thanks.
Who else? Who else has got a question for?
I have a question.
Go
I'm Feifei. I'm a master's student of HCDE program in University of Washington. I'm doing both design and research. And I know this is a kind of a really ideal situation of UX research when everything went well. And I'm curious about, like, would you have any like backup plan or any, I don't know, like prepare for unexpected things to happen? For example, you have the idea knowing that what is the ideal user or participants, but what if you cannot recruit the ideal participant you need? And what if the participant didn't show up? What if you didn't get enough participant? Like all this like unexpected problem. I'm wondering, like, will the UX researcher in professional that prepare something for that?
Yeah, so I heard about 5 questions in that question, and I would because they're all really good and really relevant. And to your initial point, I actually don't think I've ever had a UX research study go right, honestly. And that's, I think, why I like this field so much, is because you're always on your toes. And I've never seen it from the beginning, like a study from the very beginning to the end that went according to plan, period. In my 7 years, I've done over 150 UX research studies across the gamut. I've seen it all. Never once had it go right, right, so to speak. Now, that being said, just because it goes wrong or doesn't, let me reframe, just because it doesn't go according to plan doesn't mean that it's wrong. And so one of our responsibilities as a UX researcher is to be able to look at a situation and you plan for it. You say, okay, well, what happens if we only get 3 of our 20 participants? what happens if we don't have access to participants? What happens if X, Y, and Z? And this is why I cannot stress enough, it is so critical to understand the purpose of why you're doing this research, because that's what helps you pivot. So it helps you understand, okay, well, we can't do this method, but if we do this method, it still answers the question half of the way. So then we can complement with another method, triangulate our information, and we still get the answer, even though the approach is a little bit more unique. And that's the difference between someone who does UX research and someone who practices UX research. It's that ability to be able to know, based on why we're here, this is the goal of what we're trying to learn, and here are all the different ways that we could eventually get to that learning. And worst case scenario, it doesn't happen, and then you lean on best practices and you give it a break and you try again, whether it's with a longer runway or a different approach. Sometimes you just have to say, this isn't going to happen. You have a strategic conversation with your team, you utilize your best practices, you utilize your brain, and you move forward the best that you can without getting those specific answers, because we're all very capable human beings here. And I cannot stress enough, like, that's why we're in this field, and that's why this field is very competitive and it's hard to get into, is because we are elite thinkers. It's our job to figure out these problems. And so we need to empower ourselves the most that we can with these kinds of, like, with these informations and best practices, and then have the confidence to just go try it out, and then try again and fail and try again. And that's what makes this so good and so fun. It's really stressful, but it's a lot of fun. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
So the last part of this presentation was just like a recap of, like, here are all the great things about UX research. So I would probably suggest maybe let's just keep the Q&A going for the next 5 minutes. I do have a hard stop at 5, unfortunately. But if anyone has anything else, I'm here for it. Let's go.
Question.
Yeah, I had a question. Hi, I'm Anastasia. I guess kind of like along the lines of like what methods you most commonly find yourself using in terms of user research, because I know there's like interviews, surveys, that kind of stuff. So like, what do you lean on most?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that, because there are the methods that I'm asked to do, and then the methods that usually end up being done. And they're typically very different, and they're a little bit of a hybrid. So it comes back to that. Like when I was first starting off, it was all just interviews or usability testing, whether it was remote or in person. That was it. I still love interviews. I think you get the most in-depth feedback. You have a lot of freedom and access to your user. You have more access to your user than you would, say, like a demographic or an ethnographic field study, which I also love, but don't get to do very often because they're very expensive and they take a lot of time. But as far as most common methods at the beginning, interviews, usability testing. Now, as someone who's been around the block a few times, that changes to a lot of mixed methods, because things go sideways a lot and people are unpredictable. And I mean, look at COVID and the amount of pivoting we've all had to do in order to accommodate for, I mean, the world doesn't stop learning just because the world stops. Business keeps going. UX is actually one of the industries that's just taken off. And then you have your poor UX researchers who are trying to access people. So I think the most common methods that I use now are mixed. So it's never just one method, and understanding how those methods all work together would really benefit anyone who's interested in doing UX research, because it opens up the world of possibilities for approaching these problems.
Perfect. Thank you.
And
Hey, I'll ask you one final question. Then you got to wrap up, but I'm going to give you a hard one. Yeah. Explain to the group from your perspective the difference between quantitative and qualitative analysis.
Ooh, that's
I know you only have 3 minutes.
a technical one. Okay, so the shortest answer, qualitative answers the what and how, and quantitative answers how much. So, or like frequency. So whenever you're thinking about numbers or over a period of time, quantitative is the way you want to go. And the way that you get quantitative, I mean, obviously it has to be, in order for it to qualify as quantitative, it has to be statistically significant. And I'm going to try not to get as like jargony as I tend to get. But that being said, for any representation of population, you have to have that representation in numbers. And so typically the easiest way to do that, or how people will do that, will be there'll be remote kinds of tests, and there'll be surveys, which surveys don't answer what people do. It's just what they think they do or how they feel about it. It's a big thing to keep in mind. Or like a click test, which are super fun. It's kind of like a usability test, but it's just one task at a time, and it generates really cool heat maps, but you can get the numbers that you want to. Qualitative, those are going to be much smaller numbers. And this is your opportunity to understand, what do they actually do, and why, and how are they doing it, and getting into the root of the behavior versus just what the behavior is.
Which is your favorite?
Of quantitative or qualitative?
Yeah.
Oh, qualitative for sure. Even though quantitative is kind of fun when you're like looking at your results, you're like, oh my gosh, 14,000 people just took my usability test. I hope I didn't screw up.
Exactly. One of my friends said, quantitative is going wide, qualitative is going deep. And I like the deep process a lot better.
Yeah.
So
yeah. It
Kate,
helps get into their head a little bit more.
Exactly. Kate, I want to thank you so much. I know you got to run. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And remember, if you're not on Slack, jump in, and we will see you next week.
Yeah.
Thanks,
as a heads up, I do.
Yes, please let them know about your office hours.
I'll send an update in the link as well, but I do offer free 30-minute mentorship office hours. So I will share the link in the Slack channel. It's first come, first serve. So if you want, that's actually why I have to go. So it's just 30 minutes with you and me, and I can either look at your portfolio, you can ask me questions. But yeah, it's a good time. So
don't hesitate to take up our honor offer, you guys.
Yeah, cool.
That's why we're here. Kate, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Take care.